So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this seminar. My name is Lena Bartolsson. I am the Secretary General of Folk och Försvar, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this seminar, which is a cooperation between the Embassy of Latvia and the Embassy of Lithuania and Folk och Försvar. The topic of today is information operations, and it is a topic of great relevance, of course. Information operations are not a new phenomenon. However, as means of destabilization, it has been used in a completely broader scale lately and taken a central role. Information superiority, as opposed to military power, is becoming increasingly important, the Russian illegal annexation of Crimea being one example, and the development has generated lots of concern, both in the Baltic states, of course, but also elsewhere. The borders between fact and fiction and between war and peace have become blurred. The cooperation with the embassies of Latvia and Lithuania has made this seminar a reality, and I would like to take the opportunity to direct a warm thank you to Ambassador Gints Jegemanis and Ambassador Eitvydas Bajarūnas for a fruitful cooperation. Our ambition has been to highlight the current situation, some lessons learned, and also to raise awareness. And I'm so pleased with today's program, and I believe this morning will add lots of value in this regard. I would like to mention that this seminar is streamed live on Folk och Försvar's website, so it's possible to watch it afterwards as well. And you are all a distinguished audience, and I'm sure there are lots of questions, maybe to the speakers, and also some remarks that have to be made. So we just need to bear in mind to use the microphone at all times as we are streaming the seminar. Now it is a great honor for me to introduce the first speaker of this seminar. It is the director of the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, Ambassador Jānis Kārkliņš. Ambassador Kārkliņš is an experienced diplomat. His last post was as Assistant Director General for Communication and Information in UNESCO. And prior to that appointment, he served as the Latvian ambassador to France, Andorra, Monaco, and UNESCO. Ambassador Kārkliņš has also been participating actively in the implementation of the World Summit on Information Society since 2002. The NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence became functional in January last year, and the center received NATO accreditation in September. The center is based in Riga, Latvia, and contributes to improved strategic communications capabilities within NATO and allied nations. Ambassador Kārkliņš will elaborate on communication and information as strategic tools. And Ambassador, we are so pleased to have you here. Welcome. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much indeed for this opportunity and for kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is really a pleasure to be here and share some thoughts with you. I will start my presentation by putting this conversation a little bit in perspective, because it is important to understand why today is different than it was about 20 years ago. Because if we do not understand this new information environment, it is very difficult also to understand how these measures that have been put in place influence so much minds of people around the world. So I will talk a little bit about what differs soft power, as coined by Professor Joseph Nye, in 1990 from hard power. We'll provide one example from a study Center did last year, and we'll talk briefly about possible remedies, and we'll provide at the very end information about the center very briefly. So let me start with explaining this new information environment. It started with the exponential growth of new technologies. That brought acceleration of information flows, and that brought new situation when we live not any longer in information deficit, but we live in information deluge. It has also changed the way how communication was handled. If we remember earlier, the classical communication method was one-to-many. Today, this method is gradually changing to many-to-many. Every one of us can, via mobile phone, take pictures or videos, put it online, and become also a source of information. And that also is a fundamental shift in the way how we communicate today. Technology has interrupted a long-standing economic model of media, traditional media. Unlike in music, where you remember also introduction of iTunes brought almost to collapse the whole musical industry, at least this was perceived like that. Where this new economic model is found in media, it is not yet there. We're still struggling, or media outlets are still struggling to find a way how to earn revenue and to sustain at the time when majority of population, especially those who use online services, they feel that all this should be for free. And as we know, only cheese in the mousetrap is for free. Information always costs. Preparation of information costs, and so this disrupted economic model also contributes to the global environment where information is used as a mean of influence. Also, the new technology has changed the pattern of consumption of information. If you would look to your sons or grandsons or grandkids, most probably you would rarely see them watching TV news, maybe video on demand. They get information from social media, from other untraditional sources, as we say. But equally with the propagation of electronic information, it has become very easy to manipulate with information. Copy-paste is the simplest example. Of course, that is used widely. As a result, we see that this technological environment, which really benefits all of us, economies, societies, individuals, also has become a weapon, and it also has sort of identified as weapon in some of military strategies. So as a result, evolution of ICTs from one side is a great opportunity, but from other side represent certain challenges. If you would ask me to tell you in allegory what's the difference from now and then, I would say 20 years ago, all of us, we were standing under information shower. Shower in some countries worked properly. The information was prepared by professionals. We never doubt that this information is professionally prepared. We knew that it may be hotter, it may be colder, it may represent one type of use or another type of use, but we never doubt that information may be misrepresented or simply that would be disinformation. In some parts of the world, like in my country, shower was slightly clogged with the calc, and not much information permeated through. Nevertheless, we still got the information which was prepared. Today, all of us were standing more or less under the information waterfall. And many people simply are bogged down with the power of information. They are completely disoriented simply because they do lack skills of handling this information deluge, information overflow. And this is also one of the reasons why it is relatively easy to manipulate with people's minds at the time when information is not anymore a scarce commodity, but it is available everywhere. Today increasingly we live in the world of perceptions. It is not any longer the fact that matters, but it is how we perceive that fact that matters. Actually, it does not matter what I say. What matters is what you hear, and whether you hear what I say or you simply don't. In terms of when you think about your own reading or way how you read information, you most probably you look the title, you skim the page, or whether that is screen or that is a newspaper. And then if that catches your attention, you go to essence, which is in bold, and only then you would go through the text of the article. Very few people today read how we used to read newspaper from page 1 to page last. So and again, this creates just a fractional knowledge about what is in the article, because title does not necessarily represent what is written in the article. Journalists are using tricks to attract our attention, and if we do not know that, and if we do not really read the article through, we may create a perception which is completely false and make our actions based on those perceptions. Also, not necessarily everything we say and then do sends a message. Also, what we do not say and what we do not do, because if public opinion or people think that government should do something and government does not do it, it also sends a certain message and creates certain perceptions. Every word, action, image sends a message. We're not living anymore in 24 hours news cycle. Increasingly, we're living in 24-minute news cycle. News are almost continuous. This is a never-ending stream of information. And of course, technology allows us to do. Very few newspapers now are publishing so-called actual news on the newspaper. All that is published online on their web portals. Increasingly, newspapers are putting on the paper some analysis and, let's say, more elaborate information rather than just news. And certainly, information flows across the borders without permission. This is this new information environment that we need to understand, grasp, and factor in whatever decisions or analysis we're making. Now let me turn to soft power as a concept. Soft power is something that we like, all of us. Even Latvia likes soft power. We have Latvian Institute, which is a Latvian soft power instrument which projects our culture, information about Latvia, our sort of views on the world through culture, through different public diplomacy events, through our foreign policy. Our objective is to inform people and hoping that they would voluntarily accept that information and probably would change their attitude towards Latvia as a result. If we're thinking whether all countries project soft power as coined by Professor Joseph Nye in 1990, when he described soft power as ability to influence the behavior of others to get the outcomes you want through three soft power pillars: culture, societal values, and foreign policy objectives. So we see today that not necessarily every country follows the pattern of co-option. Some countries see that soft power should impose opinions and should impose values. And this, I would challenge that this is not any longer soft power, but that looks more like a hard power because information is a weapon. And when we did a study on Russian information campaign against Ukraine during the Crimea operation and in the first month of Eastern Ukrainian campaign, we analyzed some of the Russia's strategic documents. And so we found that in Russian foreign policy concept 2007, information campaigns already were mentioned black on white. Simply our read of the document was slightly different because we did not have experience of Crimea. So you see that in 2007 it was formulated that our main task is to carry out effective information campaigns in every place where a serious challenge to Russia's interests arise, aiming at maintaining broad consensus in the society about the Russian foreign policy. In the Russian military doctrine, which was published last year, we see considerable shift when it comes to information. And I think that this is also important to notice and understand. According to this doctrine, the modern warfare begins by complex usage of military force and political, economic, information, and other non-military means accomplished through the extensive exploitation of the potential of popular protest and special operation forces. When you read that and when you analyze what happened in Kiev, when you analyze what happened in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine, you see that this is a direct implementation of the doctrine as it is written and defined in 2014. We tried to also understand the campaign methods on three levels: on strategic level, on tactical level, and operational level. And so what we saw, that everything was already written in Russia's strategic documents. It was formulated in concepts, and it was supported by a number of policies, compatriots policy, by supporting Russian NGOs around the world, by expanding media presence around the world, by putting restrictions on media presence within Russia, and by promoting aims through bilateral contacts and in international organizations. On operational level, we see that there is a state control on main media outlets in Russia, either that is a direct ownership by state, or that is the control is exercised through the ownership of companies belonging to state or representing state's interests, like Gazprom. That is organized through narrative control or active measures, as well as expanding massively media presence abroad through propaganda outlets like RT or Sputnik. At tactical level, of course, there are much more, and all that you can read on this slide, you certainly witnessed also during Ukraine campaign. So first of all, that is undermining of Western democratic values and distortion of founding principles of democracy. That is a coordinated presentation of information on different platforms, being TV, or social media. There is even a term in Russian that those who master Russian in the audience will recognize, vbros informacji. So that is widely known in the expert circles. We saw that there were attacks to opponents who were not willing to follow lead of Kremlin. We know that TV channel Dozhd editor-in-chief was heavily beaten near his house. We know that TV channel experienced number of problems, being expelled from the premises they rented, and so on. Deception, falsification, conspiracy theories, framing. All these methods we identified and we saw were used by Russia in the context of Crimea crisis or Eastern Ukraine. We also saw how Russia used actors for TV interviews or so-called useful idiots to promote the position or views that Russia wanted to impose to Western audiences. And certainly the internet trolling effect is something which we find very amusing, but also equally very dangerous. What are the narratives that I could offer? Whether we should do counter-propaganda? Answer is no. Counter-propaganda never works. What we need to do, we need to develop our own narrative, to develop our own story, and tell that in a way which is appealing to the audience. We need to do our own strategic communications. We need to match our message with our actions. And we need to know that we may be manipulated by our adversaries, specifically that relates to politicians or political movements which potentially get support from Russia. Certainly we need monitoring in order to understand what new is coming, because unlike in other areas, new technology allows permissionless innovation, and every time something new comes up, and we may not even notice that. We certainly need to invest in strengthening of professionalism of media, and invest in media information literacy of population. Why? Because population need to understand how to operate in this new information environment, and without that understanding, they would be easily manipulated. So this is really briefly what I wanted to say. Of course, on our center, you may have impression that this is anti-Russian center, and actually it is not, because it is pro-Stratcom Center. We're working on a number of projects, and if you look to the program of work of our center this year, you would see that we study ISAF operation from strategic communication perspective. We study how social media could be instrumentalized as a weapon. We look at ISIL information campaign to understand how they managed to attract Western fighters. We analyze whether we can identify hybrid warfare early signals to make sure we're well protected as a result. We also do other things, and most of research results will be presented at the conference we're organizing in Riga at the end of August. So thank you very much. That ends my presentation.
this works better. So we have time for some follow-up questions. Just let me know if you would like to raise some issues, and then we will get a microphone to you. Let me ask you, you talked about that we are in this waterfall, information waterfall, and what would you say is the most common source or channel being used in this a more hard power way? Is it social media, TV, newspapers?
No, it is. It's on every platform, depending on audience. So of course, when again all the information comes from study we did last year. According to public opinion polls, the majority of Russian people gets their information from TV. So as a result, the main source and the main sort of focus is put on TV. At the same time, young people, they rarely watch TV. Actually, in Russia, again, according to public opinion polls, only 30% of internet users in Russia claim that they use internet to access information. Majority, absolute majority of them use internet more for entertainment, for communication, not as a source of information. So all this need to be factored in when we're thinking or trying to understand how this influence is projected and what remedies we could have to mitigate that impact.
We have one question here, Eva Halldén.
Ambassador, thank you very much. It was intriguing, scary, but terribly realistic. I wonder, how would you diagnose the situation in this ongoing struggle? Are you winning? Are you losing? And how active are you on social media, where most of the young generations are active, even though they're not searching for what we would call information?
I think it is premature to say whether we're winning or we're losing. Certainly, our toolbox is much more limited because it is based on our values, and whatever we do, we always need to make sure that we do not undermine the fundamental values our societies is based on, starting with freedom of expression and freedom of opinion. So therefore, it is not so easy to find, and certainly I can say that there is no quick fix to the problem. If there would be one, most probably it would be done already. So every proposal that we put forward in our study, as a result of our study, that has more mid-term or long-term effect. So, and of course, we need to counter this propaganda today, because that is coming over in very sort of strong way, being from Russia, being from ISIL, being from other malicious organizations that are trying to spread influence and poison minds of young people in Western countries. So therefore. We need to invest in those things we know that needs to be done, but still it is midterm target.
Yes. We have a microphone coming here.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for a very interesting introduction. You mentioned in your intervention about developing our own narrative as one of important tools and not counter-propaganda, actually, in this sense. What priorities would you describe, actually, for creating of your own narrative in this sense? And actually, how it is really possible, actually, to create your own parallel or alternative narrative if your, let's say, adversary is using mysticism, twisted history perception, or misinterpreted or even created political and real or unrealistic facts. Talking about mysticism, let's see all these things related about third Russian way, exclusiveness of a Russian world, etc., etc., etc.
I don't think that there should be a parallel narrative. There should be our narrative that we present, that we believe in first of all, and that we present in a way that appeals to different category of population. So that is usually I'm saying one of the best strategic communication examples I know personally is our northern neighbor Estonia. If you would travel around the world, anywhere in the world, and if you would ask question, which are countries in the world the most advanced in cyber domain, you would hear South Korea, and you would hear Estonia. And knowing the state of development in Estonia and in other Baltic states, I wouldn't say that Estonia is much further than us. Nevertheless, the perception in the world is Estonia is far away. Why so? Because already in '93, late President Meri participated in one of the first international gatherings on internet. And he started his presentation with a simple phrase. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Estonia is on the internet." It is so simple, but it was in '93. Internet was really just starting. That was not internet we know today. It was something, unknown for many. So that simple statement, which was supported by continuous policies and investment of Estonian government in cyber domain. The innovative approaches like e-elections, which no one else dares to try, made this worldwide perception that Estonia is far ahead in cyber domain. So this is what Stratcom is about. This is a message that sticks in your mind, that is actions, policies that support that statement. And here we are 20 years down the line, Estonia is the best.
Okay. The center works with improving the strategic communications capabilities within NATO and also allied nations. Do you share your findings and research with non-members as well, like Sweden or partner countries?
No, actually, center default sort of position is that every study of the center is publicly available. So everything we do can be seen on our website, and we work with open source information, so there is no mystery and no secrets about us.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now it is a great pleasure for me to introduce the next speaker, who is Dr. Nerijus Maliukevičius, who is a PhD scholar and lecturer at the Institute for International Relations at Vilnius University. And the topic of Dr. Maliukevičius is Russia's use of information operations in the Baltic states. Welcome.
Thank you. I will open. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Yanis, for putting us into the rail, into the context. Thank you, organizers and dear embassies, Lithuanian and Latvian embassy, for having this event and discussions. I want to start maybe from things that Ambassador Yanis said in the intro. Specifically the picture that you painted of digital dark ages. I think the way we are overwhelmed with information, but at the same time, we, our young ones or our communities, ethnic, religious communities, suddenly end up in the situation where they are illiterate in some sense how to use those capabilities and to use those communication tools. And sometimes I'm maybe taking it too far on philosophy, but I'm calling for maybe new digital enlightenment project to teach the digital illiterate, the media literacy projects, and then specifically teach anew how journalism should be done, how journalism is really done, because in many cases what Kremlin and Putin is doing, they are specifically targeting our Western understanding of reality and our tools of grasping with reality, specific journalistic tools and so on. I really think that Russia Today, I follow the Edward Lucas line, and I don't see it as a kind of a journalistic outlet. I see it specifically as an outlet aimed at degrading journalistic system and our Western journalistic tools. So I think there are many issues we have to grasp upon, and my specific aim today would be, or plan today would be, to talk about why actually it should matter, not just in the Baltics, but more globally in the Western world, why we should understand non-military influence. But I would like to start specifically, or to concentrate on the issue of what's behind in Russian thinking on those manipulative techniques. And I really would like to take it a bit out of the box discussion, because from my perspective, we too often use Western concepts such as soft power, such as the same as in my presentation, it is put information operations, or issues that we understand from Western perspective, and we put it as a cap on Russian strategies. But in the end, this is not what they are doing. You rightly presented, well, in essence, it's not soft power. It's really a hard power of a kind with those tools and so on. And I relate this to the story of, Putin playing with a concept very creatively with the concept of democracy, when there's Western democracy, and suddenly in Russia, in Kremlin, there's an invention of sovereign democracy, a democracy of a kind, which is in the end not democracy at all. So I think we have to critically interpret those concepts and really get into understanding what we are faced with, and then of course we will find and we will be better in finding remedies. So apart on Russian practice of non-military influence in the Baltics, and I really looking forward for discussion. But I would like to start maybe with saying that we are in a difficult situation right now because, of course, and thanks to Putin, that we are on a kind of a chaotic discussion of what is going on with information warfare, what we ought to do, and how we should tackle more quickly, more effectively, and so on. I would like to have a stop here a bit, and I would like to say that just realize that we are not in the Ukrainian situation. We are not at war. And sometimes what we are pushed into by Russian and Kremlin's, I later will talk about reflexive control strategies, is to get in the mood of war. And to talk about winning and losing and choosing their gameplay or their rules, and in the end, of course, they will beat us with better mastering those manipulative rules. So, with the starting point with this soft power, I think influence can be positive, influence can be negative. And just strategically, I think Kremlin has a clear understanding that you can play a positive side or positive strategy, call it soft power, call it agitacija and propaganda, a Soviet type of positive propaganda approach. Yeah, then you can work on Soviet nostalgia, Russian world issues, and so on. But on the other side, there's the whole realm of negative influence, a divide and conquer influence, and there are strategies that were used historically to do that. And I think the quotes here just illustrates how Putin is moving more and more towards those non-military influence concepts. Specifically, here in the first quote in 2004, you can just see and read out the vague understanding of getting into this non-military influence realm. But then more and more you see in 2012 already Putin speaking about taking those Western concepts, understanding them, and using for your own benefit. But let us not be mistaken, they are masters in this field. And I totally don't agree in this quote that they are masters just in hard power. I think they were masters for decades, and this specific plan is called Complex Plan for Ideological Work on Finland, years 1987-1989. This top secret at the time plan was made public by Bukovsky in Bukovsky's Soviet archives. The plan is enormously interesting because at those years in this plan, they are already speaking about ideas of how to enter Western or Finnish TV networks with their programming and TV media outlets. They are thinking how they could use Estonian broadcaster to go around and present TV picture for Finns. Various issues about publishing houses, joint companies in publishing and so on. And even here, they are criticizing their own agitation and propaganda and saying we have to approach young generation with sending our singers in Finnish concert halls and so on. The things we are all now discussing in the Baltics, how we are overwhelmed with Russian language TVs, how, for example, Russian singers, pro-Putin singers are all around with concerts and so on. So it was around, and they have this practice. On the negative side, somehow I'm really surprised that we are missing and forgetting those old guys and their concepts on strategiczная маскировка, on things how to do active measures, on things how to do disinformation campaigns in the West, how to create networks based on communist ideology and so on. So the practice and the experience is all around. It's just a question of different ideology. It's just a question of different strategic direction, but there are people and there are practices that they mastered through years. Where I'm moving into is that this understanding gradually is getting ground in Western thinkers and experts. And this book is not, just a simple illustration, but this book is specifically on this slide because when Peter Pomerantsev wrote in Guardian an excellent piece about how Russia, or specifically Putin, is challenging our Western reality and understanding on reality. In this text, he started by saying, I went into Russian bookshop and I got this book. And it struck me that the things that they are doing right now is really linking old concepts with the new technologies and then, you know, active measures in internet and so on. And those guys are using the same concepts, агитация, пропаганда, активные мероприятия, стратегическая маскировка, and one that we are totally forgetting, reflexive control. The tool that Soviet military even, you know, tried to count and prognose the opponent's actions because of the triggers that you put in the opponent's environment. This is why I started with the idea, let us not fall into the mood of war, because the mood of information war actually is probably the best outcome that Putin could have in our region. And maybe in discussion we can think about how really to find remedies out of the box. But here, I think this realization came in linking in Western experts' interpretation those Soviet old strategies with contemporary Putin's postmodernist technologies. In Ed Lucas' very good book, Deception, very nicely put how through, you know, even historic times, those strategies were used, and now, once again, they are in gameplay. And the very best of Pomerantsev, I really recommend, if you are on this topic, please go into his research. In this case, the title says it all. Nothing is true, and everything is possible. The, you know, quintessential idea for Putin's strategy. There's no one truth. There is no one, you know, Western journalistic strategy to achieve, you know, reality and so on. Question more, says Russia Today. There are multiple, you know, options. You know, Boeing was not maybe just shot down, maybe it was a conspiracy, maybe it was shot by Ukrainians, maybe more, and you are out of, you know, Western rational tools to grasp with reality. And suddenly, when you are lost or strategically lost, Putin does his gameplay like he did in Crimea. The, you know, political reality is solved while you are still grasping with it. So I think it's really quite interesting to go into this. I will not stick because of the time, but you know, when you realize that there is a whole realm of positive influence and whole realm of negative influence, then you can see how different you know, options you have to distract, to overload, to paralyze, exhaustion, deception, division, pacification for a time, deterrence, provocation, suggestion, pressure. But I'm not going into those. I'm going with a concept here of a filter, specifically from reflexive control. The target here is to get the weakest points in opponent's filter, and here, I want us to grasp this. I think what we are too often doing in the Baltic states specifically, we are really solving, when discussing remedies, we are solving just one bit of the SWOT strategy. SWOT strategy, just T, threat. And we are missing all important bits and parts on our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our vulnerabilities. The idea that we still can, you know, tackle this offensive by not getting into all this threat talk. If the weakness is the weakness of our journalistic system, we can work on that. If the weakness is our Russian communities, not minorities, our communities, we should work on that and help them be informed and so on. And we should even work on our own language when discussing the threats, because once again, it's not Russian community, it's not Russian minorities, it's Russian communities. It's not Putin's compatriots, it's our compatriots. And we should really stick to this question of, how to build this filter better. And I'm skipping this, but if we are going into really when Putin is borrowing those concepts and abusing them, I really agree that everything is put in his strategic documents, in national security strategy, in foreign policy concept, in military doctrine. And this was already researched with my colleagues in Estonia and Latvia. Usually a kind of a soft power tools, but which are used in a hard power manner. The abuse of those concepts, I think, is the key word here. And when we are speaking about human rights, it's how the human rights becomes a kind of Edward Lucas concept of new contemporary whataboutism, In the past times, it was, what about Western colonialism? What about racist policies and so on? Nowadays, it's what about those neo-fascists in the Baltics? What about those poor Russian speakers in the Baltics and so on? I'm not getting into this because of time, but just it's all there. The networking system, which was in Soviet times under, Communist International, we have a new International, Anti-Fascist International, others, even Radical International with far right and far left working together. So it's a kind of a schizophrenic, I would say, situation, but still quite used. Support for compatriots. Again, it's a question of soft and hard loyalty. You can work it really on the hard part when you are abusing the passportation. That was done in Georgia, that was done in Crimea, and so on. And you are building this, group of citizens which will be protected in future. Or you can work on soft loyalty with nostalgia issues, with language issues, and so on. But my point here is, well, we have to turn it around. It's not his compatriots, it's our compatriots. We should really work on their cultural media needs and grievances, and really we should take away this card from his hands. All the media networking on compatriots, just a screenshot of the project with all the newspapers and all the magazines around. Again, Soviet times, Soviet life, all the magazines, all the international media outlets, just another environment, another ideology of Ruski Mir and so on, but things tend to rhyme, or history tends to rhyme. And just shortly, I'm seeing I'm out of time, just culture and education. The issue of language is the central here, and it is very interesting, I would say, how we differently interpret how we say that we are dominated by Russian language medias and so on, and how they say, specifically in Ruski Mir research, that there's a big problem. The young generation in the Baltics don't learn Russian, and they are losing this ground. And I have a slide, simply, sorry, without translation, but just an illustration. Situation in 2000 census in Lithuania, where we just saw a kind of a shift here. It's English and it's Russian. But the decade later, we see a breaking tipping point where knowledge of Russian is just among the older generation, and we have a situation where English is prevailing and Russian language competences are diminishing. A whole different gameplay, and you have to, if you work strategically, you still have to work on young Russians. So with media, I would say that they are working in several projects with young journalists realizing those problems. But media strategy, I can go into discussion here because we just recently had an experience of closing one Russian channel, if you know, and we are really pioneers in this field, I would say. But what they are doing for years is media offshoring, putting Russian language outlets in Europe to free ride European media regulation, and then use this for their narrative benefits and so on. And those are just screenshots of projects for young Russian speakers and for Russian media events in Lithuania, in the Baltics. And just an ending part here of consular issues, I would say this repatriation program that was done for some years to return Russians to the motherland was kind of a, I would call, a joke, especially when you look into results. You realize on this specific tool, what a manipulation of those tools it's really is. It's simply using those diaspora working tools, but using them and abusing them for the benefits of this negative influence. So I'm finishing with this slide. Step by step, our Secret Service institutions are making public reviews and interpretations on things that are done on this negative influence side by Russia. The best practice, again, we Latvians and Lithuanians end up speaking about Estonians. They started that with Kapo, Secret Service Police, for decade, the public reviews about potential strategies and threats. We in Lithuania do this already for second year, but I end here with the idea that it's still one bit the threat bit of the whole countering strategy. And we are missing very important bits and parts about vulnerabilities and other issues. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now open up for questions after this very interesting presentation. Please just wave with your hand in a clear way, and there will be a microphone coming to you. Can I ask you, I mean, this idea of truth seems to becoming irrelevant. Isn't that very disturbing? And why is it so? Aren't we looking for the truth anymore?
I think it's... I would say it's probably, it shouldn't be disturbing. We sometimes overestimate this. I think it's a question of how clear we are on our values and our strategies, and in this way, you know, it shouldn't make you nervous too much when you are attacked on the media side by the opponent. I think the whole problem is this whole decade of comfortable illusion that Russia becomes or Kremlin becomes a potential partner, and we will not have those, you know, value struggles, ideological struggles of a Cold War type. But in the end, it was just probably an illusion, and we just realized that we even lost our tools, communication tools for that. I specifically speak about Western public diplomacy tools. If you would remember the end of 90s and Clinton's reform of public diplomacy, where they economized on all USA information agencies' assets and so on. And suddenly they are realizing that they are out of tools to communicate the values. So I say that it's a kind of a reality check here. It's natural that under such tension and such conflict which Putin exerts, we are, you know, in a kind of a chaotic situation. We have to recheck or to calibrate our tools, our values. But the important part is not to make mistakes. Because, for example, I usually say if you would check Ukraine, you would see that there are many things they are doing ad hoc, many things they are doing under stress situation, very good things that we could borrow, the stop fake projects, the, you know, information resistance projects of a kind, you know, NGOs working on communication issues. But then there are issues such as a Ministry of Information, which is, I would say, a very strange initiative. Then there's the idea of putting an English language media outlet, which borrows Russia Today name and names itself Ukraine Today. You could, when you realize that they did that, you think, what just happened? We are speaking about our Western tools, and we are borrowing counter-propaganda issues and strategies, and we are entering actually this realm of Putin's aggressive play, I would say.
Yeah, we really have a lesson here to learn. Right. Do you have any questions from the audience? Yes, please wait for the microphone.
Thank you so much. It's been really, really fascinating to listen to you. I have a question regarding why you insist in saying that we shouldn't fall into a trap of being in this war mood, when in fact we're facing someone who is using those tools. Wouldn't that add to the naivety or to falling back in our action to face this? I don't know. I come up with the word war, in fact. I mean, how can you actually do that? Thank you very much.
I hope you got my point that I'm saying we have to do things, but we have to do them in a right manner. And if you are fighting a war, you have to fight it creatively and, with our Baltic, for example, capacities, you have to fight it asymmetrically. The same way in a hard military realm, the same way in information realm. What I mean is that if we start speaking about counter-propaganda and so on, this is what from the start becomes an agenda for Putin's propaganda narrative. Our initiative on strategic communication in European Union, the European States Initiative. From the very start, if you would follow Russia Today narrative and Sputnik narrative was presented as propaganda technique and narrative and so on. You have to distance from those war type, information manipulation techniques, because what in the end they are doing, they are really abusing the whole, democratic understanding of this. This is a wartime concepts. You cannot, extend them for peacetime situation. It's not wartime situation in Europe, and let's not fall into the trap which will bring, us into situation where, we will be not so clear on our democratic approach towards this. But there are still ways how we can work on this if they are targeting our understanding of media system or our journalistic systems. We can work on this without, too much speaking about Kremlin and Putin's threat. I usually use the concept of Putin test. I say we have to do things which pass Putin's test, meaning that in the end we ought to do them even without Putin's threat on the borderlands. We have to work on strategic communication. We have to have an institution in European Union that would be fluent in strategic communication, in communicating values and so on, even without Putin's threat. We have to be effective on our media system and take away all possible manipulation in this, even without Putin's threat. The same way with the American approach towards public diplomacy reform. They thought that when Putin became a potential partner, they don't need anymore all those institutions, all those budgets, and so on. But in the end, there was no, enemy Putin. There was, and still is ISIL. There's the Islam world, and so on. And they are not in this gameplay anymore. So a kind of a Putin test here, just to check whether you are going into the right way.
Thank you so much. I think we have lots of things to discuss now over coffee that will be served just outside here. But thank you so much, Dr. Malukiewicz, for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, and welcome back after